Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I've got a really interesting show tonight because I wanted to chat with Rick Goldring, who is the former mayor of Burlington, someone who I came across during the Western GTA Summit, which is an organization that I had the privilege of chairing back more than a decade ago. And we had an interesting story about how we got Burlington involved. Rick Goldring is someone who I think made a big difference in Burlington, and I thought we'd talk about municipal politics, and can you make a difference? And is it really relevant? Rick Goldring, welcome to the show, sir.
Thanks, Brian. It's good to see you again. It's good to be on the show.
So tell me, do you think that municipal politics actually makes a difference? We got turnout in Mississauga in the last election of only 21%. So, people are voting with their feet that it's irrelevant and they're not even bothering to show up. I think the high of turnout was like 28% a couple of elections ago. What is it? Is it relevant? Is it meaningful, or does it just sort of exist and no one cares about it?
It's certainly relevant, but I think the bottom line is so many people take what municipal governments do for granted, and they really don't think about all the things that municipal government provides. And you look at when you wake up in the morning and the roads you drive on, and the water system, the wastewater system, parks, recreation, transit, fire, ambulance, police. It's all in the domain of municipal government. And so you look at what's provided, and it's a huge range of services and a lot of support programs through the regional government social services. I mean, there's just so many different programs and businesses and streams of services that municipalities are in that most people don't think about.
Why? Was it lack of media? Is it lack of connection? Is it just indifference? What is it?
I think there's some indifference. I remember knocking on doors and all the different campaigns that I ran in, and saying, people would say to me, well, I don't really pay attention to municipal government. I pay attention to, federal and provincial. And I said, why don't you pay attention to municipal? Well, I think it works for the most part. I think municipalities generally, most are run fairly well. And that, in fact, encourages apathy. And if they have a particular issue, that comes up, they may get involved, but the lion's share of people are apathetic, and I think they're apathetic because things work. Municipalities do provide clean water, do provide a wastewater system, and they have a associated utility, a number of them, to provide electricity and provide roads and parks and libraries, and we can go on and on and on. Is there room for improvement? Absolutely. Every municipality has the room for improvement, but too many people take what municipalities do for granted.
You were mayor. Is mayor a relevant job? Do you have a big influence on your community, or are decisions all made in Queen's Park in Ottawa?
A lot of decisions are made in Queen's Park in Ottawa, and particularly Queen's Park. I mean, we are the creation of the province, municipalities, but absolutely you have a significant influence. As a mayor, as a councillor, but certainly as a mayor in the GTA, for example, you have the opportunity to establish relationships with the premier, cabinet ministers, and senior civil servants in the province, and you have an opportunity to lend your viewpoints to them. There was Ted McMeekin. I remember talking with Ted. We had breakfast together when he was Minister of Municipal Affairs at the time. And he was asking me about the campaign period and how long it should be for a municipal government when you're running for election. And because it was going from January until the date of the election in the fall, which is a long campaign period, and he wanted to cut it down. And I suggested that he not cut it down too much, because you have to give people who aren't incumbents the opportunity to get out there on the hustings. And so I remember I gave him some specific input as far as a date that I thought would be good. And he actually used it. So that's just a small example of the influence an elected official can have in connecting with different cabinet minister staff and the premier at the province.
The power of incumbency is dramatic, and lots of people have commented about it. Is that positive? Can you change it, or is it just reality?
I think it's reality. Most municipalities, try to have strict rules with regard to the use of city resources during an election campaign, and but as a candidate, you always push it a little bit, and until somebody tells you no, you can't do that. But I shouldn't say that. I didn't do that very often, the odd time, but all sorts of other candidates do. The election campaigns drives people crazy, and what I've seen in my experience is a lot of normally logical and rational people go a little crazy during election campaigns.
I've been seeing in the current campaign in Mississauga, an incredible amount of negativity that I'm not used to, and I was surprised by, cutting down opponents and things like that. Is that normal? It's almost as if the partisanship that you're sort of used to in the United States or in Ottawa is coming to municipal politics. Have you seen that?
Oh, it certainly has come to municipal politics. No question about it. There's a lot at stake, and with the advent of social media, it gives people the opportunity to create content, and even if it's got just a grain of truth, they can spin it in a certain way, and often I've seen that where candidates can bring forward information that's not telling the whole truth, but it's enough of the truth that you can't declare them a liar, because there's a little bit of truth there. So using social media to spin issues in a certain way is a very effective strategy, or at least can be, depending on the candidate and depending on the issue.
What makes a good mayor?
I think one of the fundamental characteristics of a mayor or a councillor, for that matter, is to listen. And one of the things that I was criticized for, and I think a lot of mayors and councillors could be criticized for, is we don't listen to the people. I would say I listen to everybody. But when you have a member of the public coming forward and they have a legitimate point, and you listen to that, but you also have to listen to the viewpoint of your councillors, and you listen to the viewpoint of your staff when making decisions. But I think you have to be able to listen to people and understand both sides of the story, and you have to be able to work with your members of council in a very respectful, collaborative manner, that everybody's viewpoint matters, but you need to wrestle through all that to come up with the right decision for your community.
Rick Goldring, former mayor of Burlington, is our guest tonight. We're talking about what makes a great mayor, some of the issues in municipal politics, what he did when he was mayor, and talk some about of the municipal issues that we've got in the western portion of the Greater Toronto Area. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back with Rick in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Rick Goldring. He is the former mayor of Burlington. And it's interesting. I had the privilege since 2007 to 2014 of chairing an organization at the request of former Mayor Hazel McCallion called the Mississauga City Summit. And then after the Great Recession, she said we need to widen this, and we formed an organization called the Western GTA Summit. And it was interesting because initially it was just going to be Mississauga and Brampton, and we went to Peel Regional Council and presented it, and the mayor of Caledon said, "Well, what about me? I want in." And then the mayor of Oakville called and said, "How can you call it the Western GTA Summit and not include me?" And so we widened it to include Oakville. And then the day of an announcement that I made, I got a call from the mayor's office in Burlington saying, "How can you possibly have a Western GTA Summit without including Burlington?" And so we quickly included Rick Goldring. I remember that first conversation we had, and you were unbelievably knowledgeable about all the issues, not only for Burlington, but frankly for the whole Western GTA. And we had this big conference at the Mississauga Convention Center. We had almost 1,000 people in attendance for a full day. And it was all about, how do we move? How do we live? How do we thrive in the future? And transit was, one of the big issues, probably the number one issue that we talked about. And it was all day two-way GO train service on both the Lakeshore line as well as the Mississauga-Milton line. We included at the end Milton, Halton Hills, et cetera, in the organization. And the Lakeshore line obviously has dramatically improved service now than it was, when was that? 12 years ago, I guess, 13 years ago. But it hasn't happened on the Milton line. And then we also talked a lot about housing, and we talked about where we're going to live and what kind of environments we're going to have. And so it was, I thought, a really excellent discussion. But other than, the increased service on the Lakeshore line, not a lot of what we talked about has actually been accomplished. At least I don't think so. And we're still talking about a lot of these issues today, and housing probably more so. What do you think, Rick? Are we stalled? Are we making progress? What's your sense of where we are today versus, more than a decade ago when we were talking about need for improved transit, need for more housing, and we talked about Thrive, which was economic development?
Yeah, I think the dialogue in the last 6, 7 years has evolved, that you hear now housing is a crisis. And we didn't hear that, 6, 7 years ago. But now we're here. We know there was a housing issue, but we didn't hear it, but it described as a crisis. And certainly the federal and provincial governments are taking a lot of action on housing. Municipalities need to take more action on housing. It's a very difficult issue for our municipalities because people like their municipalities the way they are, and they don't want to see it change. But I think because of the dialogue with regard to housing crisis, people are at least more understanding of the need for more housing in their community and the resulting, transportation issues that are created. Yeah, that's been a big change. That's been a big change. Are municipalities doing exactly what they should be doing yet? I don't think so. But we've come a long way in the discussion, but we've got a long way to go to address the issues.
So let me, if I could, talk about a couple of issues, because I think there's some similarities, if not, frankly, a lot of similarities between Burlington and Mississauga. Around the GO train station in Burlington, there have been proposals for increased height, increased density, and there's arguments on both sides. The provincial government has been talking about something called major transit station areas, MTSAs, where they would mandate increased density and increased height. And I think that, your council in Burlington, after your departure, has approved some, but not nearly consistent with sort of where the provincial government would be, and the principle of transit-oriented development would be. What do you think about that issue, and what needs to get done?
It needs to be a very much a collaborative approach to the issues of housing, particularly around the GO stations. And just because you build housing around the GO station doesn't mean everybody's not going to use their car and just going to hop on their train for everywhere they need to go. That has to be done in a very thoughtful way, where you build true communities in and around the GO station, where there is a library, where there is a coffee shop and pubs and restaurants and so on and so forth, and grocery stores and drugstores and on and on and on. There needs to be those services there. Otherwise, it's just urban sprawl that's vertical. And that's a big concern of mine, is just because you're having a lot of housing around the GO station, yeah, it's good if people need to take the GO train, but more and more people aren't taking the GO train, are not taking a GO train to an office every day. You need to look beyond just the GO service. There needs to be thoughtful transit service there for the local municipalities, but there also needs to be this view and approach to building those public and private amenities that people rely on to try to keep them out of their cars as much as possible.
Is that happening? Certainly when you submit to, municipal governments for approval, you have a certain amount of amenity space per square foot that you have to provide. And you've got, monies that you have to give for development fees and other things that are supposed to go to public amenities. So is that not happening? Are municipalities not requiring the private amenities in the condominiums or the apartment buildings that are required under, zoning rules? And or are they not using the development monies that they receive to create the social public amenities?
Yeah, you can say you require it in the lower level of a 25-story building. You can say that, but until you make it attractive for the merchant or the store owner to come in, from what I see, it's not happening. I look at the Aldershot GO station in Burlington. There's all sorts of housing being built there, but I don't see an overarching plan for the amenities that need to be in that area to make it a real livable community. And does the housing come first and then the amenities come second? Ideally, you want them to come along together. I'm not sure if you're aware, Brian, or some of your viewers and listeners are aware of a development in Innisfil on Lake Simcoe, and it's called Friday Harbor. And I know Friday Harbor very well because I own a property in Friday Harbor. But they've done a great job of bringing in the amenities in the early stages of people moving in there. So if you live at Friday Harbor, there's a Starbucks, there's all sorts of restaurants, there's a liquor store, there's a boutique grocery store. There are, amenities and golf course and so on and so forth. So for much of your time, you could exist just solely at the resort or at the Friday Harbor property because they have all these amenities. Well, that's the type of mindset you need for these new developments in and around the GO stations. You want to make it very attractive for people to hop on a bike or go walking for their groceries, to go to the drugstore, to go get their dry cleaning, their doctor, their dentist, whatever it is.
But you can't force that. It's got to be economic. I was in Streetsville just last night.
It does have to be economic.
In Streetsville, I was walking the main drag, Queen Street, which is Mississauga Road in Streetsville. The Second Cup is gone. The Starbucks is gone. There's a whole bunch of shops that are closed down, and there were people walking around. One would think that there still is demand, but you can't force that. Those major chains or local independent chain stores decide whether they want to be there or not, and you got to have the demand that justifies.
Right. So you need economic planners as well as urban planners to do some projections and to see what it's going to take to have, like, what sort of density and what sort of demographic is necessary for it to be successful for a Starbucks, for a Shoppers Drug Mart, for a boutique Loblaw store or whatever to be in a certain neighborhood. You need your planners at the city to understand the numbers that are required for businesses to be there and try to figure out a way. It's not simple or easy. What we're talking about is not simple or easy. But just putting housing around a GO station, I don't think you're achieving much.
So BC instituted a regulation this past year that said if you're within 400 meters of a major transit station, there was a minimum height of 12 stories. And so it's almost the opposite of what you get with a lot of municipalities, I think in the Greater Toronto area, where they're resisting height and they're resisting density. And in BC, they're saying you've got to have more than 12 stories, or 12 stories is the minimum. And so they're really trying to, and your justification is some of the same things. It's their justification is that's the right place to have housing close to transit, that you want to justify the transit, and so therefore you need to make the enough users close by, and that's what can drive the economic development that creates the walkable,
Right.
semi-urban or urban environment that you've talked about. Is
Exactly.
that a good idea or a bad idea?
Oh, I think it's a good idea to have some minimums there, but I think the minimums got to be, the decision for how tall these buildings should be and how much density should be based on some sort of economic parameters to make that urban hub or that major transit station area, to make it viable as a place to live and a place to do business, place to recreate, and so on and so forth. It can't just be the provincial government mandating height. I mean, that's part of it. I mean, more people living in an area is going to add to the desirability of a merchant to go there and provide services to, a retail store or whatever. But I don't think any of that. I don't think there's enough thoughtful discussion and collaboration going on with really what's required around these major transit service areas.
And enough thought and collaboration is between municipalities and the provincial government, or with developers, or what?
I think it's municipalities, developers, provincial government. I think as many people as you can have having the discussions. This is not simple. What we're trying to do, I used to be trying to do, but what really government is trying to do is retrofit suburban communities like Oakville, Burlington, Mississauga to be much more urban. And people moved to Burlington, Oakville, Mississauga because they liked suburban living. And now we're looking to impose something different in certain areas of our communities is very difficult. It's very challenging.
Well, let's
But
talk about that.
we need to bring people together to figure out what's necessary to make sure those new communities are very vibrant.
Let's talk about that for a second, because I think this imposition in certain areas is right and wrong. So, one issue is these major transit station areas, these transit nodes that we've just talked about, and this MTSA was rumored to have been announced last August. It still hasn't been announced, and so everyone's still wondering exactly what's going to happen in that. But one thing the provincial government has done, and the federal government has done even more, is mandate as of right zoning everywhere. And not just in certain areas. So last year in the provincial government legislation, they mandated an as of right to turn a single family home into a triplex. And that was provincial government overrode all local single family home zoning to mandate that. And then the federal government came in and upped it one by saying it's got to be quadplex. But they didn't have the ability to mandate it. So what they did is they sort of I don't know whether you call it a bribe or an incentive, but they said you don't get your infrastructure money unless you actually pass something that says it's a fourplex everywhere. And then Premier Ford came out and said, no way to fourplexes, because that's going to mean there's 4- and 6-story buildings in the middle of suburbia. So, you said just 2 minutes ago that governments are mandating things in certain areas around transit zones, but they're not. They're actually mandating changes everywhere to triplexes provincially and fourplexes federally. And a lot of cities are giving in to the incentive / bribe from the federal government and agreeing to it. And some are using strong mayor powers even when the councils are against it to institute it. What do you think? Are triplexes or fourplexes everywhere in Burlington and Oakville and Mississauga a good idea or a bad idea?
So I can answer the question directly because I'm not elected official anymore. So is it a good idea everywhere? No. Is it a good idea in certain places? Absolutely. Absolutely, it's a good idea, but it's not a good idea everywhere.
But the federal government, the provincial government are mandating it everywhere as of right.
Yeah. The reality is that even if a municipality signs up for triplexes, that zoning for triplexes are fourplexes, the economics of the situation are such that there'll be limited take up.
And that's one of the criticisms of the triplex issue, that there was limited take up, so not that many people did it, and so the Liberal Party provincially, put forward a bill that you could build up to 4 stories, as of right, which would, they say, justify the fourplexes, or the threeplexes, so that you could take an existing single family home that may be 1 or 2 stories and increase it to 4 stories. Is that a good idea or a bad idea?
In certain areas it can work, but not in every area.
So if you
that would be contentious. So if I was still mayor of Burlington, and I'm open to the idea of having fourplexes in some areas and not in other areas, well then you can imagine the community dialogue that, oh, you don't like our neighborhood as much as you like this other neighborhood, and so on and so forth. But
it's
that would be my view, is that
it works in some, it might work in some areas, and
it might work in some areas,
inappropriate in other areas. So your neighbor in Oakville is turning down this money from the federal government and objecting to the mandated fourplexes, and Windsor is turning down the federal money and the mandate for fourplexes, because effectively they're saying what you're saying, that it's not appropriate everywhere. But then other cities have completely capitulated and done what the federal government wants. Yeah. What do you think? If you were still mayor, would you stand up to the federal government and negotiate or turn down the money, or would you give in?
I wouldn't give in to fourplexes everywhere. That's for sure. I would not give in to that. There's certain areas on certain streets and collector roads and so on and so forth where you can justify that. But for every single family home neighborhood in the city of Burlington, as an example community, to have the right for fourplexes, don't see it. I don't believe that's practical.
One of the criticisms that I heard of the idea was that there's been no study to say whether our streets can handle 4 times as much traffic, or 4 times as many cars in driveways, or 4 times as many cars parking on street parking. Yeah. And so the infrastructure, the water, the sewage, etc. And the comeback to that was, well, but not many people will take it up. And so the question is, if your comeback to why you didn't need to study if it was possible is, well, not many people are going to take it up, then why actually put it in place to start with? It sounds like a sort of a woke idea to say something that actually isn't going to actually be used. It's just a wedge issue to make forward a comment.
I don't disagree with that. I don't think it's well thought out. That's a blunt. They're trying to use it as a blunt instrument, and it shouldn't be. It should be used with more precision. And as much as you want it to be easy, if you believe in that strategy that fourplexes can go everywhere, well, then you want to make it fairly easy for people to develop fourplexes. And the challenge is it isn't easy. And if you're going to do that, you want to have some parameters around it and some restrictions as to the type of housing it would look like, that it has to meld in to the existing neighborhood. No, and some of our mature, whether it be Mississauga, Burlington, Oakville, Toronto, wherever, some of the mature, older neighborhoods, it might work in some situations to have a threeplex or a fourplex, but it's got to be architecturally, it's got to fit in some way, be compatible with the existing neighborhood.
But the criticism of it, and the reason why it hasn't taken off, is that that's not possible. That you've got to increase the height to 4 stories, or that you've got to increase the volume of building on the property. And then other issues come up, like, you got to double or triple the size of the driveway. Are you going to have bigger garages? And then, you raised about 10 minutes ago the idea of amenities. One of the proposals is that everyone has to have their own amenity space, their own backyard. And so then all of a sudden you're going to allow fences. They're going to split backyards into 4. Like, has this been thought through, and is it possible, or is it just a woke argument?
Okay, I'll use your words. I think it's a woke argument.
Rick Goldring, interesting conversation. We're going to have to take a break for some more messages, and I'm going to come back. I want to talk a little bit about waterfront and maybe some more about transit. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes with former Mayor of Burlington, Rick Goldring. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. A real pleasure and honor of mine to have Rick Goldring, the former mayor of Burlington, who I had the real pleasure of working with over a decade ago on the Western GTA Summit that I had the privilege of chairing. And he really was a voice of realism and thinking about the future. So what could get done, but also what needed to get done in the future to build the cities in the Western GTA that we need to build. Rick, there was a really interesting article in the Globe and Mail on Saturday by Marcus G., who was criticizing the Toronto waterfront. And he said that there was no there there. And he said that, we had this opportunity with Harbourfront. We had this opportunity at the bottom of Yonge Street, and we never did it. And it's a whole bunch of disparate things along the waterfront. And he said, in San Francisco, it would be Fisherman's Wharf, or in Chicago, the Golden Mile, or Fisherman's Pier. Pier 4, I think it's called. In Seattle, it's Pier 5. In Vancouver, it's Granville Island or the Seawall. In New York, it's South Street Seaport. And in Toronto, it's just, it doesn't have a hole. It's a bunch of condominiums. You've got a really good waterfront in Burlington, but it's probably not also Granville Island or Fisherman's Wharf. And Mississauga's got an opportunity to develop a waterfront. What do you think of the Greater Toronto Area's development of waterfronts? What's done right, and what has done wrong, or what could we do, if anything?
Well, certainly the waterfront has been a controversial piece of discussion when I was mayor, about some proposed developments that have actually occurred now and been constructed in the last number of years. I think a lot of people like to refer to Chicago, that the other side of the road, on the lake side of the road in Chicago, there's no development. I can only speak to Burlington because I know it well. And just yesterday afternoon, my wife and I went to downtown Burlington, and we went for a 10K walk along our waterfront, and it was packed. It was absolutely packed. We have this little beachfront area at the foot of Brant Street, which is Burlington's main street, and very small beach area. It was packed. the beach park along the way into towards Hamilton on that southwestern part of or northwestern part of Lake Ontario. It was packed everywhere we went. Was packed, and that is the result, I think, of some good planning and good foresight by a number of people to put together the right amenities in place to make it just an attractive place to visit. It's the waterfront itself is the attraction, and yes, there's a pier, and yes, there's a nice boardwalk, and there's a nice children's park and a nice larger park for walking around in and picnicking in. But it's turned out fantastic, and I must say I was quite pleased to see thousands of people enjoying themselves yesterday in a beautiful long weekend. In so many different ways, it was wonderful to see. And I think Burlington has done a very good job with the waterfront. And 2020 hindsight is we should have bought up more property along the waterfront to give us more park space. But you can always look back and it's not helpful sometimes to look back, but you can always look back and say, wish we did something different. But
So some of the things that you've got in Burlington that I think make it more successful is that you do have commercial development as well as recreational development. I was at an interesting conference when we talked about waterfront development when I was on the Mississauga City Summit, where they said that West Vancouver is one of the best examples of a successful waterfront because it's got a beach and boardwalk right on English Bay on the ocean. But then it's got another strip that is Marine Drive that's all commercial and coffee shops, restaurants, retail, etc. And they said people want to do both. They want to recreate and have leisure and open space, but then they want to stop and they want to people watch and they want to shop. And one of the reasons why Central Park in New York is so successful is because they got all these park benches that you can hang out on and watch people. And they've got restaurants, Terrace on the Green, and they've got museums. They've got stuff to go to. You've got a beautiful big restaurant right in the middle of the sort of the waterfront area on the south side of Lakeshore. And then you've got a whole sort of downtown on the north side of Lakeshore. Was that planned or did that just happen organically?
I think Burlington is fortunate in the fact that you have all that waterfront area and that the main street is right on goes to the waterfront. And you got Lakeshore Road, close by, a major road. I think we've leveraged the sort of natural amenities that Burlington was presented with. And I look at one of my predecessors, former Mayor Rob McIsaac, who had a great vision for the waterfront, and much of the waterfront that's there now is a result of his particular vision. The pier was part of his vision. I was the fellow that finished the pier, but it was Rob's idea to have the pier. So I think a lot of good decisions have been made, but I think Burlington was blessed with some good fundamentals in place in leveraging, the natural features of Burlington.
There's been a big controversy over the course of the last 2 years in Mississauga and Peel in regards to should Mississauga be a separate city and separate from Peel, or should Peel continue to exist, and what's the right structure? And at one point in time, there was some concern that Doug Ford, the premier, might be amalgamating regions, and I know that particularly the mayor of Oakville, led a strong campaign against amalgamation. But Hamilton has amalgamated, Sarnia has amalgamated, London has amalgamated, Ottawa has amalgamated, Toronto, the old 5 parts of Toronto have amalgamated. What do you think? Is regional government good? Is it bad? Should amalgamation be considered and thought about, or no separation should be considered and thought about?
Well, a few years ago, when this government, the provincial government, was elected, they wanted to look at regional government, and they had a couple people do that and interview people. I think there's always room to look at improving, existing systems. But in my view, in the region of Halton, regional government works. Maybe some changes need to be made, but regional government works. And I couldn't figure out the discussion in Mississauga and Brampton and Peel with regard to Mississauga being its own city and Brampton being its own city. I couldn't figure out how that would make sense financially, other than it's an emotional argument on based on wanting to be independent and not be, not be in the same governance structure for certain amenities with others. But I think in Halton, regional government works well.
Yeah, I've talked to a bunch of people about this, and they said, yeah, separation's a good idea when they're thinking about it from an emotional standpoint. But when confronted that their taxes would always likely be higher and it was a potential $1.5 billion cost minimum, they really quickly say, oh, no, I'm not willing to pay more taxes for separation. Like if I could get the separation and benefit economically, I'm all for it. But if you're telling me my taxes are going to be higher, then no, I want to keep the Peel region. And then if you say, what if you amalgamated? Oh, no, I don't want to amalgamate with Brampton, like the last thing I want. But then if you actually told them, but some studies say your taxes would go down, they say, well, then I'd think about it.
That's interesting. It's interesting. In the region of Waterloo, you've got the city of Waterloo or the city of Waterloo, city of Kitchener. And 70% of people in Kitchener wouldn't mind merging with Waterloo. But only 30% of people in Waterloo want to merge with Kitchener. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Is there room for improvement? Yeah, probably. But I think regional government works very well in Halton, and I would say Peel from an outsider looking in. What are the key services that the region provides? It's police, paramedics, big picture planning, public health. It's appropriate for those services to be offered in the way they're offered. And it's appropriate for the types of services that the local municipalities deal with. I think the division of responsibility and powers is thoughtful for the most part.
Transit. Let's talk about that. The
maybe there's something that should be regional though, is transit.
Okay, so rather than Oakville and Burlington and Milton and Mississauga buses all being separate, there should be what, Metrolinx buses?
The interconnectability in Halton region to go from one municipality to another by local transit is very challenging, to say the least. So the idea of having some interregional routes, designed in a thoughtful way, has a lot of merit. But I think with regard to transit, Burlington Transit looks just within the borders of Burlington, and same thing with Oakville and Milton, and Halton Hills doesn't have any transit. I believe there's merit in at least considering and looking at regional transit service. And I look at Mississauga and Brampton. I mean, they're right next door to each other. They're two large municipalities. I can't comment on the connectability between Brampton and Mississauga of transit routes. You would know better than me. But I think it's important. However it's provided, that there be good connections and interregional routes between local municipalities and various regions.
How important is the GO train to Burlington, and the fact that it's gone from every hour to now, it's almost every 50 minutes, and even more frequent than that during rush hours?
Yeah, it's every half hour for most of the time, and then more frequent in rush hours. And Oakville right now, I believe, is every 15 minutes. So we're just a little bit further west of there. But having GO trains in Burlington, I think, is great, and the GO stations is wonderful. It gives people the option to take the train to wherever they're going. Typically downtown Toronto, it's a far more enjoyable experience than driving most of the time. It's a good thing. It's a good thing for Burlington, because people will come and move to Burlington recognizing they have the option of taking the train. So it's very positive for many, many reasons, for work, but also for going to the sporting events at the exhibition or in downtown. There's no better way to go than the GO train.
So you may not have a personal experience with this, but let me ask you anyway. So, the Mississauga Milton GO train line is, like 6-7 trains down in the morning and then outbound in the evening. It's not all day two-way, and it's not frequent. It's only rush hour service, and it's only one way. And for 20-25 years, there's been a proposal to make it all day two-way frequent service, like the Lakeshore line. Would it be a good idea, do you think, to do that? And would it change development along those GO train lines and at those GO train stations if it happened?
Oh, it probably would around the GO train stations, probably make it more desirable. for development and for people to live there, or there's more frequent GO train service. But, you look at the growth in Milton over the last 15, 20 years, it's off the charts. For the longest time, Milton was the fastest growing municipality in Canada. And when you think how many people are living there now, and the GO train service is sporadic or not that frequent, it would make a huge difference in many ways to people that live in Milton if they had that option on a more frequent basis. And obviously that would help out Mississauga as well because of the direction of the line. But no, the more GO transit service, the better, for sure, in most communities that are in and around the GTA.
Let me ask you last question, and I have no idea how you're going to answer this. Probably not the way I want you to, but still worth asking. You were a city councilor before you became mayor, and you were on council, I think, what, 6, 7 years before you became mayor?
4 years, one
4
term.
years before you became mayor. In Mississauga right now, the 4 leading candidates are all career politicians. They don't have much, if any, experience outside of politics. And then some of the other people running have got, business experience. What do you think is best? Career politicians or people that have got experience in the private sector as well as politics?
Well, how's this, Brian? I'll frame it in this way. I think for me, the experience of council was a good thing, 4 years of council before becoming mayor, because that gave me the opportunity to understand the issues for 4 years before I actually became the mayor of the city of Burlington. However, I don't think it's absolutely necessary. I look at Rob Burton, the mayor of Oakville. He'll be 20 years almost, I think, as mayor of Oakville, and he wasn't a councillor before. I look at Brian Mulroney. When he became prime minister, he became MP just a little bit before I believe he became prime minister. There's lots of examples of people not following that route of going on council first and then becoming mayor.
What about the people that have only got political experience?
To be successful in government, be successful in politics, you need some combination of style and substance. And however you define that is, it's like beauty. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. But different people have different strengths. And I think in government today, I would say generally, there is a lack of business type experience for key positions. And key positions would benefit from having people that have had some business experience, some finance experience in a significant way. And I'm not saying that just municipally, I'm saying that provincially and federally, and especially federally.
I think especially federally. Rick Goldring, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian. I've enjoyed it. All the best.
Thank you. All the best to you, sir. And we're going to take a break and come back with some concluding comments in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Thank you, Rick. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.